Hi guys, so this is a continuation from the causes and effects of the War of 1812 video. So this one is going to focus on the impact that it had on our culture here in the United States. So in the last slide on page 6, we talked about the surge in U.S. nationalism. So nationalism was one of the biggest effects that it had on the United States. Definitely with the spirit of national consciousness or national oneness. So at the beginning of the war, we were kind of not together, but at the end of the war, we were very kind of together and cohesive as a nation. And America is capable of defending herself. So we've proven to Great Britain, we've proven to France, particularly Great Britain, especially since they've had this idea that we were weak, we were very organized. All of this during the French and Indian War, we kind of proved that wrong with the American Revolutionary War by winning that, as well as this new war that we had with them in the War of 1812. So it showed our capability and military savviness as a way to defend ourselves as a country. Also, the idea of nationalism meant the death of the Federalist Party. So this temporarily reduced sectionalism, so this idea that certain parts of the country were kind of had these different ideas and that they were in different sections, and also temporarily reduced the idea that states should have more rights than the national government should have more power as well. So it kind of reduced a little bit of that sectionalism that occurred with the Democratic Republicans, as well as the states' rights sentiment with this increase in nationalism and this increase of being one together as a country. It also meant the decline of economic and political dependence on Europe. Our manufacturing really increased. So with the embargo that we had against Great Britain, we now were producing our own products. And our focus started turning to those natural resources and things that were available in the uncharted land that was westward, that a lot of our settlers or frontiersmen wanted to acquire. So more of our focus was turning west. And then it also demonstrated itself in literature, art, and architecture, which is what we're going to talk about in the next few slides. So primarily with literature, we went through this period of Romanticism. So this romantic period of U.S. literature lasted from 1820 to 1860. And this marked the first great literary generation of America. These writers, including Nathaniel Hawthorne, James Fenimore Cooper. These artists, Herman Melville, Edgar Poe, were really influential in changing the ideas of literary structure, as well as in terms of these ideas of these protagonists being haunted, being alienated, these larger than life protagonists or larger than life protagonists left to make kind of their own way and to chart their own territory. So this idea of uncharted territory and the single protagonist kind of making their own way and figuring things out kind of lended itself to, again, this idea of searching westward in a new frontier, what else is out there for us to acquire. So James Fenimore Cooper wrote The Pioneers and the Last of the Mohicans. Again, kind of the idea of that westward movement and the dwindling population of Native Americans in particular. Also with Nathaniel Hawthorne, he created The Scarlet Letter and The House of Seven Gables. And then with Herman Melville, Moby Dick was his famous one. And then Edgar Allan Poe, you had a lot of that short stories as well. So they were very influential, and it was the first really literature class, at least with these authors, that really influenced the first great literary generation in America. Poetry also incurred a lot of change as well. So we had a lot of poets like Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who wrote a poem with Paul Revere's Ride, which you can see on the left-hand side. The Song of Hiawatha. We have Ralph Waldo Emerson with the Transcendentalist and the Young American. John Greenleaf Whittier, Legends of New England in prose and verse, and then Oliver Wendell Holmes, Old Ironsides, which really focused on the battle at Lake Erie with USS Constitution, and then The Last Leaf as well. So a lot of these have very kind of Americanized idealisms in terms of this idea of transcendentalism and transforming ourselves and finding our own way. So once again, kind of the same theme as a lot of those literary artists or authors with literature also extended into poetry. Art also incurred a lot of change as well. There was a lot more focus on the exploration, showing natural landscapes in terms of settlement. So it really reflected this 19th century idea of discovery, exploration, and settlement, especially as we start seeing more and more people moving west into that newly uncharted territory that we acquired with the Louisiana Purchase. So they also focused on the aesthetics, so the beauty of nature and the sublime in landscapes. So as you can see on the right-hand side, with some of these paintings, it focused on natural beauty, natural light landscapes, the beauty of, obviously you can see a lot of waterfalls, the beauty of nature within the water and landscape, and as well as the trees. And there were two schools of art that were really influential during this period in terms of American art. Was the Hudson River School, which included Thomas Cole and Albert Bierstadt, and then you had the Rocky Mountain School, which was Thomas Moran's paintings. So if you ever have a chance, check them out. Really good in terms of artistic interpretation of exploration, settlement, discovery, and the beauty of nature itself. Really focusing on natural landscape. Architecture also incurred a lot of change during this time as well. We started moving away from these huge Georgian-style houses, which were acquired from Great Britain and English. We emulated a lot of the architecture that was happening in England within the 17th century towards a more neoclassical style, really taking some notes on the Greek and the Romans in terms of their architectural style rather than the English and their Georgian style of architecture. So we started copying ancient Greeks and Romans in the style of government, especially our government buildings, which still exist today. Even if you go downtown and you look at the courthouse building, you see those Roman columns that are all around. Even if you drive on 43 South towards 94 West, you can definitely see that Greek neoclassical Roman style of architecture, particularly when it lines to our government structured buildings. So courthouses, our capitals, our state capitals, national governments, the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., a lot of these used a lot of that neoclassical and Greek or Roman architecture. So you can definitely see the difference between the Georgian house style, which is still very beautiful. You still see a lot of the houses in the Georgian style that were built before the beginnings of the 18th century and 19th century. And then as you see more government buildings being structured, even Monticello, I think in some ways still has a more neoclassical Greek revival. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner. Also, universities use a lot of neoclassical Greek revival architecture in their structure as well. So it's not only just government buildings, but a lot of schools and universities, particularly, I think some in the South as well, use that as part of their architectural development. Again, really emphasizing Georgian. You can see the building with Independence Hall in Philadelphia on the right-hand corner. But then you see the government buildings with neoclassical Greek revival. So there is a definite difference in the style of architecture. I still believe Georgian is very beautiful style, very classic style. But again, this use of grandiose and kind of re-emphasizing the times of the Greeks and the Romans really kind of shows through in some of our governmental agriculture as well. So again, once again, Georgian versus neoclassical. All right, so we're kind of into this point in American history where we're in this period starting with James Monroe's presidency. So with James Monroe, this era of his presidency was known as the era of good feelings. So this lasted from 1816 to 1824. It was based on a one-party system, so there weren't multiple political parties. As we said, the Federalist Party kind of fizzled out at this point. And we really started to focus on manufacturing and developing our own companies, our own structure, our own economy and infrastructure in our country. So instead of relying on foreign powers to help us with that or imports to provide things for us, we started creating our own things. And also, very, very, very important, along the lines of manufacturing, obviously very important, is as well the Missouri Compromise and the Monroe Doctrine. The Missouri Compromise in itself, especially, will lend itself to be an issue when we get closer to the Civil War. So that continues to be an issue through the 1800s. The Monroe Doctrine deals with our foreign policy and developing an idea of hemispheres and who or who should not be meddling in different affairs or be within the lengths of different hemispheres of the world, which we'll talk about as well. So within the Missouri Compromise, Missouri was asked to enter the Union in 1819 and become a state. James Talmadge introduced the amendment on the Missouri statehood, and this agreement that was brought by John Talmadge, actually it's John, not James, sorry, was that no more slaves could be brought to Missouri. So again, that it would not be a slave state. And there would be a gradual emancipation of children born to slaves whose parents were already there as slaves. So no more slaves would be, or slavery would be incorporated in the state of Missouri once it did become a state. So the South viewed this as a serious threat to the balance of slave versus free states in our country. So they tried to have an equal balance or have an equal amount of slave states and an equal amount of free states. So right now, the Senate still has 11 slave states and 11 free states. With the Talmadge Amendment, it might set the precedent for future states on whether or not they would be slave states or free states, basically encouraging that future states with this amendment would now not become slave states. So obviously the South saw this as kind of a threat to their livelihood and could really, really impact the economy in different parts of the country, particularly in the South, and that slavery could eventually start disappearing throughout the country. So the Senate refused to pass this amendment and wanted it to be a state-decided decision. Instead of making it a government-decided decision, the states would have the right to decide whether or not they would be a free state or a slave state. So again, with the emphasis in that we're having equal amounts of slave versus free states so that there's equal representation in government. This eventually will obviously become a huge, huge issue. Within the compromise that was had with the Missouri Compromise, was that Henry Clay crafted this compromise after the Talmadge Amendment was rejected by the Senate. So what Henry Clay proposed was that Missouri could be admitted as a slave state, with Maine, who was previously a part of Massachusetts, would become its own state, and when it's admitted as its own state, would become a free state. So therefore, equaling out that balance of now not having 12 free and only 11 slave. If we admit the state of Maine and keep Missouri as a slave state, Maine could be a free state, therefore equaling the balance of 12 to 12, especially for the next 15 years. So the future of slavery prohibition in the North really existed along this line of latitude. So any state that was north of the 36-degree latitude line would be a free state, so where slavery would be prohibited. So anything north of that. So that existed on the southern border of Missouri. And anything south of that line, if it was admitted to the Union, would become a free state. So as you can see, if you see underneath some of the text, California is kind of cut in half, and that will also become an issue later on as well. What do we do with California? Since it is a larger state and it's kind of cut in half by the 36-degree parallel line, what happens when that future actually will occur, or what will happen to it in the future? So both sides, both states that supported slavery and states that supported the prohibition of slavery supported this agreement by Henry Clay, this compromise. But the legacy was that it lasted for 34 years until the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. And we'll talk more about that Kansas-Nebraska Act because it's a huge issue that will come back to this idea of the Missouri Compromise, and states deciding on whether or not there should be slavery and there shouldn't be slavery. Slavery was now the dominant issue in U.S. politics. So with the Missouri Compromise, this brings the issue of slavery and states' rights to have slavery to the forefront of political issues in the United States. There was a serious setback to a national unity. So instead of, especially after the War of 1812, we had this huge idea of nationalism. We were coming together as a country. Now with this issue with Missouri, it kind of starts to split the ideas of how slavery should be implemented with newly formed states and what should we do about slavery in the future. So especially within the southern states who were really kind of entrenched in their economy with slaves and using slaves as forced labor, really wanted to keep slavery because it was a huge part of their economy, and their economy would collapse if slavery did go away. So this kind of created a division between slave states and free states in the North. So again, we started becoming more sectionalist rather than nationalist. So it set back our national unity. And like I said, the South began to develop a sectional nationalism all of its own. So the South was kind of their own little group. They were away from the North. They wanted to keep slavery. So they had their own individual thoughts about what should happen. And the South looked to the West to form more alliances as well in order to emphasize their thoughts and what they thought should be policy. So as you can see where some of these states were, you can see that 36-degree parallel line with the Missouri Compromise where it's right above Arkansas Territory. You can see those states that are slave states are the ones that are in orange or reddish. The ones that are free states are the ones in neon green. And then you have the unorganized territory, which hasn't been established yet, Oregon country, and then the rest of which is controlled by the Spanish, which eventually within our next unit will be an issue with the Spanish-American or Mexican-American War. So we'll talk more about that as well. And a lot of people who were celebrated in Texas were some of the main people involved in that Mexican-American War. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So next is the Monroe Doctrine. So the Monroe Doctrine concerning Europe was that European monarchies, so the kings and queens of Europe, were concerned with revolutions that were occurring in Latin America, particularly within the Spanish monarchy, slave revolutions, wanting to get freedom, revolts that were happening within their plantations that they owned and the territory that they owned. They saw democracy as a threat to absolute monarchy. So if these people started to become or started to spread the idea that they should elect their own leaders and get rid of these monarchs, they saw democracy as a threat to their absolute rule. So they really sought to restore newly independent Latin American countries to Spanish rule. So they really wanted to restore their control of these newly independent countries that were having revolutions and trying to revolt against the Spanish monarchy and the control of the monarchy as well. So the Monroe Doctrine was established. It was penned by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, who was a son of John Adams. He warned Europe that they should keep, or they could keep, their existing colonies, but cannot establish newly formed colonies in Latin America. And they wanted to leave the independent republics, the U.S. and Western Hemisphere, alone. So once again, the Spanish or any other monarchies could not establish newly formed territories. They could keep the ones that they have, but that they should stay out of the Western Hemisphere and leave it to the United States. And they also maintained George Washington's tradition of avoiding entangling alliances. So we weren't taking anybody's side over another person's side. We just wanted them to kind of keep their territories, but leave the rest alone and stay to your side of the world. Basically, stay in the Eastern Hemisphere, and the United States would stay in the Western Hemisphere, and we would not interact with each other. So this became the cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy throughout the 19th and early 20th century until we start, especially within the United States, start our imperialism of other countries, particularly Hawaii and the whole Spanish-American War in Puerto Rico, which becomes an issue, which we'll talk about later on. But again, Monroe Doctrine really reinforces that idea of isolationism and neutrality in terms of our foreign policy. All right, so with the summary, what I want you to kind of do is, again, review your causes and effects of the War of 1812. Know what the causes are, know what the effects are, know the areas that it influenced America, and then also describe what the Monroe Doctrine is and also what the Missouri Compromise entailed as well. So those are the very important parts that you will need to know for your test that's coming up this week. But make sure you understand the causes and effects of the War of 1812 and as well as the Monroe Doctrine and the Missouri Compromise.